Hey, welcome back to the Tournament Center here at Pro Tour Avacyn Restored. My name is Marshall Sutcliffe. I am joined in the booth by Zac Hill and Sheldon Menery. Gentlemen, we just saw some very entertaining Magic.
It's Magic the way that you want to see it played at the highest level. Aggressive, interesting, complex, complicated.
We saw 3 matches go to 5. We saw, you know, the legend himself, John Finkel, toppled by a relative newcomer to the scene. I think we're going to have a really great semifinals coming up too.
Well, Alexander Hayne locks up Rookie of the Year there.
Yeah, so Jesse Hampton was in the lead for Rookie of the Year heading up to this, and just got jumped at the very last minute here by Alexander Hayne. But with a second place finish at a GP for Alex, plus this now semifinals, and who knows?
And who knows?
It's hard to take anything away from him there.
Right. Well, it turns out a Pro Tour semifinals does pretty good things for you in the Rookie of the Year, right?
Yeah, it does. Okay, so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be chatting.
Oh, really?
We've been focused in on tournament Magic, right? This whole weekend has all been about block constructed. We've been talking about, you know, the interactions, the cards, what are the breakout cards, Wolfir Silver Hearts, and Avacyn's Pilgrims. We're going to broaden things out a bit.
Sure.
Okay. There's a lot more to Magic than just hardcore tournament scene, than just brewing block decks and drafting and such. There's a whole lot of other things.
That is the fun part.
That happens to be probably our favorite part.
Sure.
Maybe yours too, Sheldon. We'll find out in a little bit here. But there is more.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a bevy of stuff, and it's just going to be us talking. So let's just get right started here. So we've been talking a lot about specifics in this format, right? Which cards do you choose? What do you do? I want to take it just one step further back, and I want to say, Zac, as somebody who's not only played on the Pro Tour, had to been in these positions before, but now also is a game designer for R&D. You have a totally different perspective. How do you approach this kind of thing in like a block format, a small one like this?
Yeah, well, a format like this is always really exciting for me personally because I love to design new decks, and I love not having an established environment to draw from.
Okay.
You know, there were no 3 months worth of net decks that you had to get off the internet and refine. You had to come up with everything from scratch for this tournament. So the thing I like to do in formats like this is sort of test the limits.
Okay.
And so I like to think, what is the fastest deck you can possibly design? And that's probably something based around Champion of the Parish.
Yep.
Maybe you look at your one-drop, Stromkirk, Noble, Gravecrawler, Diagraph, and you figure out which of those decks have the most support.
Okay.
Then you sort of take the opposite end of the spectrum. You say, what is the best possible late game you could ever have?
Okay.
And that's got to be something around either Entreat the Angels, Angel of Glory's Rise, Gristlebrand, something that when you cast it, it's just really difficult to lose from that moment on.
Okay.
And so then you look at the other fundamentals. You look at mana acceleration and card advantage.
All right.
Your mana acceleration starts with Avacyn's Pilgrim, have Scorn Villager, and there's really not a lot else in there that competes with that.
We saw those guys out in force this weekend too.
Right. And then finally your card drawing, you have the Planeswalker, Tameo, but you don't have a lot of really good just raw card drawing effects. You're getting a lot of your card advantage out of flashback from cards like Sever the Bloodline, cards like Devil's Play. Faithless Looting, not strictly card advantage, but it can machine gun you through your deck. So I would be looking at the different ways to maximize Magic's fundamentals, and then to try and explore from there.
Okay.
So that seems more like a bottom-up approach instead of a top-down. You take the things that you have available, the tools that you have available to you in the format, and see how you can best use them.
Exactly. You kind of take the building blocks and then see what you can create.
You don't want to go into is there a mid-range deck? Is there a beatdown deck? Is there a control deck? It's like, what are like you said, the fundamentals of Magic, and what are the best things to leverage those fundamentals?
Right.
So when you're doing this, and let's say you find a really quick deck and a really slow deck. So are you now taking the pieces that you have? So if you just found the quickest deck in the format, what would stop you from just running it?
I like fast decks, so probably not a lot. I mean, the thing that you have to realize...
Maybe I asked the wrong guy.
Yeah, really, right. Not being able to show up at the tournament.
Fever.
I think the thing is, what you have to appreciate when you're designing for a format like this is that everyone else is doing what you're doing too. And so if you have a really fast deck, but a deck that's really vulnerable to a certain card, once you realize that other people are going to know that, you have to decide whether you can work around those vulnerabilities. Cards in this format that you know are going to come up are things like Huntmaster of the Fells, things like Bonfire of the Damned that are really powerful against your deck, and there's not necessarily a lot you can do about it. So you can decide, okay, am I going to play things like Faith's Shield that let me get around this? And you have to play test and see whether those defenses actually work. Now, if they do, you kind of say, okay, well, this is the deck I'm playing, right? Like, I've got the fastest deck. I can kill people before their strategy gets off the ground, and the stuff they're doing to stop me is bad and doesn't work. But if it does, if your own ways to prevent that don't work and they're beating you anyway, you either say, okay, well, I bet they're not going to play it. I'm going to run this deck. B, I'm going to just outplay them and it doesn't matter. Or C,
that must be nice to have that option.
Right. I don't have that option nearly as much. Someone like Paul Rietzel really does have that option. And then finally, you might just have to say, okay, this is not going to work and I need to try again.
Have you ever found yourself sort of focusing in on something you want to do and then sort of getting lost, everything else starts to blur and you over focus on what you have a desire to make as opposed to what's the best thing to make.
I was going to ask you that too because we were talking earlier and you mentioned a tooth and nail deck that you ran at a pro tour, right?
Yeah.
That's a pretty unique angle.
It was.
At the time.
Yeah.
So when you see a card like, maybe let's say you see Grizzlebrand, right? And you're like, oh my, I love this card. I want this card to be on the battlefield, and you get obsessed with that. Does that hamper your ability to really make what would end up being the best deck, or do you just have to have the discipline to not go for that thing that really, that you're attracted to?
Well, this is where having a good team really helps out. Because I can sit and look in you in the eye and say, you know what, I'm not going to have any biases. I'm going to focus on what wins. But the reality is everybody has preferences.
Sure.
I really like to go over the top and do stuff that just is the best late game trump and try to survive till I get there. Other people, Pat Chapin likes his blue-based control decks.
Yep.
Right? Cedric Phillips likes his white aggressive decks. Different people like different things. So what you want on a team is everyone evangelizing a different strategy and everyone really working hard on a different way to approach the format.
Right.
Because the other thing that can happen is, you have 3 people that really like your white-red aggressive deck, or you have 2 people that really like your Naya deck, and they're working hard to make that strategy work, but people aren't working to make the rest of the strategies work. So you convince yourself that you can beat everything else in the format, but that's really because you're just not trying to build the decks that are good against yours. And that is where a lot of very good teams get trapped, is in a sort of groupthink mentality where they forget that everyone else is innovating just as hard as they are.
Yeah, I think, and that might have even showed itself this weekend. We saw a lot of mid-range decks that honestly played the best cards, right? They just, the most obvious cards showed up and they said, well, I want this one, and this one. I'll put those in a deck, and then they kind of put a shell around it. Some of them recognize, if I get mine before he does, that's better, so we'll put some mana ramp into. And they weren't really pushing the boundaries.
Right, they got kind of locked into a thought process.
Yes.
And said, this is how we're going to do it, instead of, this is how we want to try to do it, and now let's somebody else on the team try to beat us, and then we'll have our data. No, they just locked in. They said, here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And they probably ignored some other empirical data that they probably needed.
Well, an example that reminds me of that, when we were talking to Sam Black earlier on, we did a deck tech feature with him. He was saying, that his segment of the team came to the conclusion that Huntmaster of the Fells just was not as good as advertised. Sam's quote, I think, directly was, "It's only good against other decks playing Huntmaster of the Fells."
And so they just took themselves out of that situation and said, "Look, you guys can play the Huntmaster game. You go over there, you get yours first, he gets his first. You can be stacking triggers. We're going to ignore that."
Right. We're going to put a Spectral Flight on our creature and just attack over the top of that.
Right.
But if you get too caught up in your own metagame, it's really easy to miss things like that. And I know I personally have done that before. I played Fairies at Pro Tour Hollywood, and we had a really good main deck. We realized we needed to play 4 Thoughtseize because everyone was playing Fairies, everyone was playing Bitter Blossom, so we needed as many answers to it as possible. But once we got to that point, we didn't really think about, okay, well, after that, what are we going to do after sideboarding? Because I think we just became too comfortable with what our level 1 plan was.
Right, so your data gets skewed because you're looking at you're not looking at the big picture. I think I remember from back in the day, a lot of the New York guys, okay, when we're building our decks, we have to figure out how we beat John. And
that was their metagame?
Yeah, that was basically their that was their metagame.
John Finkel metagame.
So they lost the broader view of the rest of the field.
Yeah, so they had a deck that was well tuned to beat one player, and then everybody else
or one style.
Yeah, or deck.
Who knows?
Yeah, one of the decks that we did see come out from somebody who clearly did take this concept and push it. Miracles. We have Alexander Hay now. Alexander's in the top 8 now. He's advanced to the semifinals, and he's playing a pretty unique deck. You mentioned a few minutes ago, Zach. You said you want to see what's the fastest and what's the slowest, and then kind of start evaluating from there. It looks like he pushed towards the slowest end of the spectrum here.
Right, and it's not just the slowest. I mean, the decks will wind up being slow, but you basically want to figure out like what deck can you build that no other deck can possibly beat it in the late game.
Okay.
There's just if it gets to do its thing, given unlimited time, it's just always going to win.
Grizzlebrand, reanimating stuff. Like we've seen Angel of Glory's Rise make a big splash.
Yeah.
I didn't see that one coming.
Right.
And we've seen people attrition them out.
Well, especially the Infi combo with the
Falcon
Aristocrat.
Wrath.
And,
what does that do? I haven't seen that.
Oh, I didn't know until I saw
Aristocrat attack for 4.
That's not bad.
Yeah, it did a lot of work in that way. But what, does it have a combo that it can like just, you sack all the guys and then just get them back and just do it again?
That's one part of the combo, but something else you can do with Angel of Glory's Rise is reanimate a pair of Fiend Hunters and the Aristocrat itself, and just start looping those. And
so you're
just
annihilating their board.
You can, and what actually happened on camera was you Fiend Hunter the Angel of Glory's Rise, and then that exiles it.
Yes.
And then you sack the Fiend Hunter to Falconwrath Aristocrat, which puts it in the graveyard.
Okay.
Brings back the Angel, which brings back the Fiend Hunter.
I would do that.
+1 counter.
Exactly. So that's one counter every time.
I would do that.
You would do that.
Yeah, that's a play that I would make.
It's hasty.
And it has
haste
haste
too.
Right.
And you're removing their guys when you do this? Like, is a Fiend Hunter actually...
No, you're only
targeting
your you're only doing yours, so you're loop.
But Falconwrath Aristocrat has flying, so a lot of their creatures just aren't going to get in the way.
And that's one of the things we notice is that flying is actually really good in this particular form.
Extremely good.
Okay, so this Miracles deck. But he did definitely push towards that end.
Oh, very much so.
Maybe not the slowest humanly possible, but he used some cards that I actually thought we were going to see a lot this weekend, and we haven't. Tameo.
Right.
Tameo the Moon Sage is a planeswalker that came out recently. Usually planeswalkers have a big splash. They're flashy and everybody loves them. And a lot of them find their way into constructed decks one way or another. And I kind of assumed that Tameo would in some way. He's one of the only people running Tameo. It's just not that often that you see a Tameo. I mean, is that a direct result of like a Huntmaster of the Fells getting 2 creatures? You can tap down 1, but then she's still under pressure. How do we, why don't we see more Tameos?
Well, I think the planeswalkers are vulnerable to creatures, especially creatures in multiples. So they're really difficult to protect, even when it has an ability like Tameo to tap somebody down, protect yourself. Multiple creatures means you're not going to get multiple uses out of them.
Right.
Yeah, but there's also flash creatures around. There's Wolfear Avenger. There's Restoration Angel.
Right.
And those interact. I mean, Tameo would like to lock down one of those potentially, but they can.
Right, and make it bigger with something like a Kessig Wolfrun or a Wolfer Silverheart. I mean, I definitely think it's difficult to employ Tameo effectively
in block.
In block, and it's also just blue was fairly underrepresented. I mean, it's we see a couple of decks that are the Spirits deck plays a lot of blue cards, but Spectral Flight hardly your traditional blue spell you think of like gaining card advantage, accumulating resources.
That's a card I get pretty late in draft, and oftentimes doesn't even make the deck.
Right.
And now we have Godanis entering the semifinals, and the last game that we saw, I think he had 2 of them on 1 Wolfear Silverheart.
Right, exactly.
I mean, I got to say, I didn't think I'd see that this week.
Maybe in the limited portion, yet again.
So, you work for Wizards of the Coast.
Yes.
You design Magic cards. You develop Magic cards.
It's
You're
not
in the
a bad
process.
gig.
Yeah. We all secretly glare at him as he walks by, like, why can't I be him?
Aw.
Miracles. These had to be really, really, really tough to develop.
They were.
Can you talk us through a little bit of the processes that you guys went through? Maybe a little tidbit of information about what they might have been and if they've changed. Can you give us anything as far as Miracles?
Sure. I mean, Miracles went through a ton of different iterations. You know, the first thing was they basically, originally they had one effect, but if you miracled them, you got an additional effect. So the one that I'll always remember is with the Miracle Wrath of God. We always had a Miracle Wrath of God variant, but when you revealed it at first, it flickered a creature. So the idea was you could flicker one of your own guys, hard cast the Wrath, and then you'd have a creature and your opponent wouldn't.
Okay, so it would stay away, it would come back after the thing was done.
Right.
And
the thing that was lame about that was it just didn't come up very much.
Okay.
And so we then changed it around to like, okay, maybe you get a more powerful effect when you miracle it.
So Wrath of God, a little better than that.
Yeah. Plague Wind, Wrath of God was in the file for a little bit. The awkward thing about that was, like, we didn't change the cost necessarily. So when we didn't change the cost, you just didn't miracle things that often. Because like if you still needed 4 mana, you, okay, like I drew it on turn 3. Well, that's lame. I can't do this.
Right.
So we eventually decided for most of the miracles, the gig was going to be make the mana cost very low so that it can happen a lot.
Yeah.
Well, the trouble with that was you'd build a lot of miracle decks that wanted to go long, and then just on turn 8, okay, I miracled my Thunderous Wrath. I dealt 5 damage. I could just hard cast it
play it anyway.
Right. So that's where the X-Spell miracles came to fruition. Was we wanted something that scaled the longer the game went on.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the cards that we saw in the match that we were just watching was Temporal Mastery.
Right.
Now, this was a card that I have kind of a love-hate relationship with. When I first saw it, I was taken aback.
Oh, yeah?
I was like, they can't do that. Now, that lasted about 30 seconds because I read it a couple more times and I saw they put a clause in that says is exiled, so we're not going to get any crazy looping happening, right? And, you know, I've always viewed Time Walk, I kind of put it up on this little pedestal.
Of course.
I want you to talk about, is taking an extra turn as good as people think it is?
Well,
because it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's real good.
I'll take an extra turn anytime.
Sure.
Yeah, I've heard people say like, oh, it's just, you know, you do it early. It's just an Explorer where you untap 2 lands.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah, I don't know what just means in that sense. You know, I explore for free.
Yeah, so you get the card back and it's just for free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that card's insane. You know, we would never print that.
You would never print Explore untapped 2 lands.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I don't think it's bad then by any stretch of the imagination. Clearly, it's at its best when you have a lot of creatures to attack with, you have planeswalkers to use, so you just get more elements of the phase. But now, you know, how good is Time Walk when you have to spend your entire turn casting Time Walk, you know, for 7 mana? Obviously, it gets a lot worse.
Yes.
So Time Walk, you know, it's an effect that has variable impact as you progress through the game, depending largely upon what your board state is. So it's a pretty high variance card, or high variance effect.
Magic, I mean, Magic is really a lot about resource management.
Of course.
And developing your resources earlier and better.
Yeah.
You know, playing 1 extra land or drawing 1 extra card on turn 4 is way more significant than doing the same thing on turn 10.
Right.
Your percentage advantage is much higher.
Yeah. Relative to your opponent.
So the cheaper, you know, the Time Walk or the Temporal Mastery as board development off the miracle cost on turn 3 might be really significant.
Of course.
Because you're definitely up a land and maybe even up a dude. Now you've gotten rolling faster.
Exactly.
I mean, we think of Time Walks as sort of control-y elements.
Yeah.
Because they're blue, but really this is an act of aggression.
And we saw that in one of the mana where it's just like play an angel, cast a Time Walk, attack you, Geist of Saint Traft into Time Walk. All of a sudden the game just ends.
Right.
You know, you deal 20 damage out of, you know, in no time at all.
You'll be happy to know that back and forth on Temporal Mastery for me, I love it now.
That makes me happy.
Yeah. So it took me a little while to get there. I was a little scared. You know, I was kind of creeping around. Like, I don't want to get Time Walk left and right, but now I just love this card and I want to play it. Like, if I was going to play any deck from Block, so I'm going to be doing coverage at GP Anaheim, which is also Block, and I am going to be keeping my eye out for this deck because I want to see this thing go again.
Well, I think Robert Jurkovic played it in his deck, in his constructed deck in the round. And, you know, he wasn't really playing a Miracle deck, but he was just playing it for that tempo. Is that break? You know, I have a slight advantage. battle, Temporal Mastery, battle again, and that wins games.
You're talking about in the draft rounds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was very powerful there. It won him a game we saw on camera where it was just like attack. You know, his opponent thinks he's winning the race, and just nope, time walk. Sorry, attack you again, you're dead.
Yeah,
that is.
But that's powerful. Like you should be able to do that for 7 mana,
right?
Or you should be able to do that if you just happen to hit it at the right time. That's fun.
And it brings up an interesting point, which is that's sort of how we had to develop miracles.
I like taking turns.
Yeah, talk us through that. This must have been like when they came to your plate, were you just like, what am I going to do with this thing?
Well, it was not easy.
Yeah, it must have been a huge challenge.
When Design handed us this file, we were very much like, can we even do this?
Yeah.
So we had to figure out, like, okay, how do you think about this in a way that makes sense? So the way that I started to...
how do I think about it as a player, or how do you guys as developers?
As a player and as a developer, you know, it's like, what is the rule set we can use? You know, and it's going to be hard to play test, you know, thousands and thousands of games just to understand it all on raw, you know, data.
You guys don't have thousands of players that are at your level of expertise and understanding, sitting there ready to just play test.
And you know, we did end up playing thousands
of games. Yeah.
But at first, you know, we're like, okay, where in the ballpark do we cost these? So the heuristic we used was basically like, imagine like how good does a card have to be?
What's a heuristic?
Sorry, it's just a rule, a plan to use. Appreciate that. You know, how do you think about it? The way we thought about it was, how good does a card have to be to play it in your deck if you mulliganed every time you drew it in your opening hand?
Okay, so you look at your opener, and this card says, if it's in your opener, it's a mulligan.
Let's just say it's
How
a blank.
Good does this have to be?
Right, to play it in your deck.
Okay.
And it turns out that Time Walk is actually about that good. It's just so good that you're like, you know what, I'm willing to mulligan some percentage of the time if I can play 4 copies of this in my deck. You know,
that's fair.
So then, you know, that's not exactly right, but that's a reasonable place to start. And so then where you go from there is, okay, well, you're not going to always draw this in your opening hand, so that means you're not always going to mulligan. So that makes the miracle cost, you know, better than it would be otherwise. So you have to move that cost up. But on the other hand, these cards aren't literal blanks in your opening hand.
They're not.
Right. At some point, you're going to be able to hardcast them.
We just saw Alexander Hayne hardcast his Temporal Mastery for 7, and this isn't block constructed. We're not even talking draft. He just
hardcast it. So we basically sort of approached to a point from there where, like, okay, we can cost the hardcast enough to where it's not just totally embarrassing to draw.
It's not 12 mana where it's like, look, this isn't happening.
Exactly.
It has to be just on that upper end of attainability.
Right. And that lets us move the miracle costs up enough relative to their effects.
So you kind of polarize these things where how low can we go here, but then how high does it make us go here? Okay.
Which is basically the trick of development, if I understand it correctly. I mean,
that's certainly a lot of
the right, well, yeah, it could cost 1 less, yeah, it could cost 1 more. Where's the right range for the thing we want it to do?
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
fine
not easy.
Line.
You know, I think there's a lot of folks that go, oh, that should just cost that. And experts like you guys get into there and you go, well, it would be nice. It would, you know, this would be a great card if it cost 1 less and was an instant. Sure it would, but you have to keep an eye on balanced gameplay, and that's got to be a great challenge.
Totally.
Gameplay. I have a question for you about gameplay. Sir. So we were watching the match between Alexander Hayne and John Finkel.
Yes.
We saw some discussing, some judgy-looking discussing going there.
Yes,
and you're a judge emeritus. You're the guy I would ask first for a judge question. What happened? Did you get any insight into what was going on out there?
I did, as a matter of fact. I walked out and I happened to talk to head judge Ricardo Tessitore and tournament manager Scott Larrabee. What happened was Hayne presented a 65-card deck.
That's not legal.
That is decidedly not legal.
So he sideboarded in 5 cards, did some shuffling or something, and then just neglected to take out the rest, probably.
Right. He probably.
Have you ever done that?
I wish that I could say I hadn't.
He probably piled shuffled in the 5s. It came up. You know, there were no leftovers. It wasn't 61. It was probably 65. So he presents the deck, and of course, I think John counts it. You know, I didn't actually see what happened, but John probably counts it. It's like, wait a minute. There's 65 cards here.
Okay.
Now, the baseline penalty for this, presenting an illegal deck, is a game loss.
Game loss.
Yes.
Now this is game 5 of the quarterfinals of the Pro Tour.
Match.
Right. I got to tell you, the rules change when the spotlights come on.
Okay.
There's two sides to this. We want Magic games decided. We as people who are involved in the production of the Magic show, as it were. We want games to end as organically as possible.
Okay.
I mean, if we had a way to go into some temporal bubble, every match would have infinite time.
Yeah.
Because we want Magic to be a game of skill,
right,
and come to its organic conclusion. Unfortunately, there are necessities of.
I've played in PTQs. You got to get through these things. You only can have one day to do them. You can't stretch those type of things into.
Sometimes the hall closes at 12 o'clock.
Right.
We have not invented a time bubble yet to just step into.
So can you?
I'll get
look, we both look right to you.
Hey, look, man, I made Temporal Mastery.
Yeah, I figure you're halfway there
We're
anyway.
getting there. Yeah. R&D has
Maybe
many
just
projects.
Bump the cost down a little and we can all cast it.
So Ricardo and Scott had a discussion about what's the impact of this. Do we want Game 5 of a Pro Tour quarterfinal decided on basically a technical problem?
Yeah.
And their answer was no. They even got some input from John Finkel, and I think Ricardo went over and asked him, "What do you think?" John's like, "I think I'd rather play," which I mean, yeah, which certainly goes to the character.
How much
of
does
the
that
man.
say about John?
But
because he could push that issue, he can't ultimately decide it himself.
Right,
of course.
But he could say, I know the rules, this is the rule, this is what I want done, and really kind of stand up for it. And he said, look, I want to play Magic.
And I'm telling you, if I was sitting in that chair, I would have done exactly that. It's like,
So
sorry, man.
So, anytime you get into a judge situation, especially when circumstances are unusual, you have to think, at the highest level, you have to think, what's the impact that I'm about to make on this decision?
Right. Okay.
Because deviation from penalty guidelines has a cascade. It has a cascade effect. I want judges and players at your PTQs to understand that this is a significant deviation, and that the Pro Tour is a significantly different event than that PTQ is.
Yes.
Highest level Magic played for Magic's sake.
A lot on the line for the players.
Exactly. So Scott and Ricardo really, here again, a Pro Tour head judge, the tournament manager, guys with a lot of tournament experience.
Right.
What's the best decision here? This certainly we don't want anybody to be in this situation.
Oh, of course.
We would rather he have presented a 60-card deck.
Yeah.
It's not what happened. How do we make the best for both this showcase event and Magic all over?
Yep. Of course.
And the answer is, we think it's better if we play Magic.
Yep.
Which is exactly what we did.
I mean, we were happy about it.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't mind watching another match.
Yeah, I was pretty excited to see that last game. I mean, it ended up being kind of a lot of angels. But if it had ended, it
would have been thoroughly unsatisfying to have. Remember, back in the day, David Mills lost the Pro Tour for not tapping his mana correctly. Back in the day, you tapped mana before you cast
your spells.
There wasn't either tap it before or after.
Okay.
And he had gotten warned about 7 times in the top 8.
Yep.
And finally, they said enough. Procedural error. You lose the Pro Tour finals.
Game.
The fan base found that very unsatisfying.
Yes.
Fans of Magic, both at the casual level and the competitive level, said, this is awful. We want Magic players to play high level Magic, not worry about administrative stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things people point to is, hey, in golf, don't they they disqualify a guy if he doesn't sign his scorecard wrong. We might not want to take that model.
Maybe they do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's the correct thing to do.
It doesn't mean it's the correct thing to do for us.
Yeah, for us.
So
right.
Again, this is not a precedent-setting thing.
These decisions are not taken lightly.
No.
Right? I mean, there's some serious discussion happening behind the scenes there about what are we weighing out here.
Exactly, and it's people who have many years of experience doing these things. I mean, we saw in Honolulu There was
little replay.
the little replay thing. Toby Elliott, you know, a level 5 judge of much experience. Scott Larrabee has been doing this since the early days.
Yep.
You know, there were a lot of smart people in that room talking about this. Okay, what's good, what's bad? How do we, you know, how are we shooting ourselves in the foot with decision A or decision B?
Yeah.
And you have to weigh. You know, sometimes there's not perfect answer.
Yep.
So you have to give yourself best answer. And I agree in this case, this is definitely the best answer.
I think so too.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, for us it was. we got to cover it.
We got to see more Magic.
Yeah, BDM and Rich got to see a little more Magic, and I think it was prudent to do it this time. But this does not change anything.
This does not change anything at the PTQ level. When you're out there playing your events, present your legal deck, please.
Game losses will be incurred if not.
Exactly.
Okay, we've got that covered. Sheldon, Commander. You're known for this. This is kind of your gig.
It is.
I was wondering if you could give, you know, I kind of want to hear the story from you in person here. I just want to hear how it progressed to become what it is today, and then I want to talk to you about a couple of recent things that Zac and company have been doing in R&D to kind of help Commander come along even further.
Okay. So, I had a casual
Sheldon
gaming
takes
group.
a deep breath.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Never
try
told this story before.
I'm gonna try to do this in 2,500 words or less.
We'll be
I had a casual gaming group in Anchorage, Alaska, when I was stationed there at the 381st Intelligence Squadron at Elmendorf Air Force Base. We met at my friend David Pfeiffer's house just about every Monday for sort of game night.
Right.
We would play Risk, we would watch movies, we would paint miniatures, you know, all
the geeky stuff,
all nerd
of us
culture.
love. Yes.
You know, we also played Magic on Friday nights. I mean, I was already a level 3 judge by then. We were running PTQs. I eventually became the tournament organizer up there. So there's a lot of Magic. And one of the members of the group, Adam Staley, said, "Hey, there's this format I've been thinking of or found. You know, the fuzzy part is how Adam came by the idea, but." There are 5 Elder Dragon Legends.
Okay.
So each of us builds a 100-card singleton deck with the General. And the original rules had, if you took 21 General damage, you lost, no matter what your life total was, because it's 3 hits. There were 7 sevens.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's 3 hits from
if
either.
you got in 3 hits, okay.
I choose nickel bullets.
At the time, right. At the time, the format was true singleton, so even basic lands. And there wasn't a ban list, but it was a gentleman's agreement to play no non-basic land hate.
And this was just between you guys, so it was easy to...
Yeah, it was definitely a little kitchen table group. I got transferred to Virginia in 2003 and got a new gaming group. Okay. And we started playing we basically played casual Sunday Magic in addition to PTQs and whatnot. And one day I said, "Hey, you know, we were playing this format up in Alaska, and what do you think?" And they were like, "Hey, that sounds kind of cool." And again, these are casual Magic players. Guys are all, some of them have become very good in the time since then.
Sure.
But for the most part, you know, small collection, casual guys.
Get a few packs when the new set comes out.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
So we started playing it, and we were starting enjoying it so much that we stopped playing other Magic. We stopped playing other casual Magic. You know, we're still going to FNM and whatnot, but and it became the thing we did. And I made a few rules changes. Okay. Banned a few cards. The first card I banned was Biorhythm.
Biorhythm.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, good game.
Yeah. And we put the non-basic. We took the singleton nature out of the basic lands, so you could have as many basic lands as you want, and kept the singleton nature. Other than that, no real rules changing. Then sometime in 2004, I believe, I wrote an article about it on Star City Games.
Was this the jumping off point for?
Well, no, it wasn't, because I had already started bringing it to the Pro Tour judges. So I brought I would bring 3 or 4 decks and I would farm them out.
And then people want to build their own decks.
Fellow level 5 judge Geese Hogendijk also had picked up the we talked a lot, and it was like, build an EDH deck. It was like, cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we would then descended on. I think the first real big one was Pro Tour Atlanta. Okay. And we started playing, and it just caught like wildfire in the judge community
so quickly.
So I started. It was like, this is kind of an interesting idea. So then I wrote about it. I was writing a Feature Friday thing in addition to the Ask the Judge column, and I said, well, let's talk about it. And then from there,
boom.
Really, players picked it up. I mean, it was still kind of the judges format at the time. Through about 2006, when Canadian Level 3 Gavin Duggan said, it's more than just us playing it now. Let's go.
Let's make this.
Yeah, so we formed the rules committee. We we got a website, and we started rolling, and then we restarted paying attention from sort of a higher level with a more global mind to the format.
Okay.
My watchword for the format is, it was like, oh, casual versus competitive arguments, and I can combo out turn 3 all the time arguments. The format is kind of broken.
Yes.
If you want to break it.
If you're that person, it's very easy to build a deck that can win a lot of games.
Yes. The idea, I believe, is to build decks so that you make games that are memorable.
You create experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
Not games that you'd rather forget.
I think that's a good guideline. A lot of people that play Commander, it's hard to tell when you sit down with a new group.
Right.
Are these going to be the guys that are going to be just smashing me with their insane deck, or are these the guys that are like, I have 6 dragons?
Yeah.
Or are these the guys like you, Sheldon, who are like, look what I did? Yeah. I did something that you've never seen in Magic. You might not see it again, and we experience that.
I think the idea is you build casually, then play competitively.
Yeah.
Again,
I like that. Do you play Commander?
I think about Commander a lot, and I play it as a developer. It's not really my own personal cup of tea.
Yeah, I have a hard time. It's like I've played it before, and I've had some of those experiences, and those are the times I've really relished it. Yeah, and so those are the things that I like the best about Commander for sure.
I mean, I do have to say, Avacyn Restored is probably the best set ever for the format.
Well, and we thought about it a lot while creating that format. I mean, while creating the set. We realize there's a lot of people that love Commander, a lot of people that play it very passionately, and we want to make cards for those people. We realize that not everybody is just a competitive player or a spike like me that tries to win every game. So we want to give them the tools to have, to create those memories that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a format that I intentionally shepherded toward something for the other players.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so good.
We have enough. I mean, we have vintage. If you want to do broken stuff,
play that
competitively. You have vintage. As long as I'm going to tell you, as long as I'm involved, it's never going to be a competitive format.
I agree with you.
If somebody in brand or in OP says we're making a competitive format, I'm going to stand in front of the tank.
Well, make sure you don't get run over, Sheldon.
But again, you're right. It's creating the memories. It's the laughs that you have.
Yep.
It's a social. I don't think casual is the right term. I think social is a better
word.
I mean, casual means a lot of things.
We were playing last night in the lobby in the hotel, and there was just there was the tables that we were playing on were too small. There were cards everywhere. There were 4 conversations going on. Hey, what did you just do? Oh, no, I want to take that back. But we were having a good time playing Magic. Yeah. And then we killed Rashad.
Yeah. All right, guys. Let's switch to the competitive stuff again here.
All right.
We are going to be sending it back to the booth at some point here, and we've got 2 matches to decide who gets to play in the finals of this Pro Tour. We have Josh Cho, Star City Games Blue team member.
Yep.
He's going to be playing against Alexander Hain. Now, we just saw the Miracles deck, and Josh is on a Naya list. We've seen 30% roughly of the field is Naya. It's kind of the, what did you call it, the defining deck of the format, Zach? Yeah.
It's like the baseline.
Right. Zach, what do you think about this matchup? I mean, Miracles maybe built to beat this deck?
I certainly think that the Miracle list is very good against the Naya deck. I think it overcame a pretty bad matchup in the quarterfinals, but I think against Naya, you know, all of its wraths or board clearing effects very well suited against the mid-range threats. And Naya doesn't have a really good way beyond Bodfire of the Damned to overcome and treat the Angels in the mid to late game. And even if it has it, you can always go and treat, time walk, and just kill the opponent in one attack step. So I think the Miracle deck is very favored there.
Okay. And in our other match, we've got Ken Yukihiro. He's playing Reanimator.
Okay.
And he's playing this deck is so sweet. Like this deck has to be one of the most powerful decks.
I think so.
Top end, you know how you were mentioning that earlier. This has to push that boundary.
Oh yeah, there's not a lot that you
far.
can do beyond Gristlebrand, Angel of Glory's Rise.
Right.
Gristlebrand.
I like that he did both. A lot of people said, we're just going to do Angel of Glory's Rise and call this good. He's like, nah, we're just doing it all. And then we've got Godanis Vidugaras. He's playing Spirits, the same one that John Finkel was playing. How do you view this matchup?
It's a really hard matchup to predict.
Yeah, this one's really tough because the Reanimator deck has shown its ability to slow down the opponent.
Well, and we heard from Sam Black when he did his deck tech with us that he was building a combo deck for a mid-range format. Now, the thing about that is Yukihiro's deck is also, in a sense, another combo deck. It's kind of a mid-range combo deck, and that it can just beat you with Huntmaster of the Fells, Falconwrath Aristocrat. You know, it can just attack you until you're dead.
Yeah.
But it also has this obviously this tremendous combo element of Unburial Rites into one of these giant fat creatures.
Yeah.
Now, Godanis' deck, not a slow deck. So I feel like Yukihiro's deck doesn't have a lot of time to get off the ground. Also, I believe that against Gristlebrand, Vidugaras' silent departures are going to be huge. Because even if Yukihiro has a ton of cards, he might just lose on the attack.
Yeah.
But the Angel of Glory's Rise plan, very difficult to defeat if you don't have Invisible Stalker, because the flying ability of the Spectral Flights, it lets them push through huge amounts of damage. Yukihiro's deck can have flying creatures to block.
Restoration Angel or something like that.
Right, or Falconwrath Aristocrat, which can actually block and survive.
Right, Aristocrat.
So it's a really hard matchup to predict to me. I'm not exactly sure who's got the advantage in this one.
I'd be interested to see the numbers of times that Yukihiro had Grizzlebrand in play this weekend and didn't win.
Yeah.
What would you guess? Let's say he had it in play 5 times.
4.9.
You think you just win? Do you think Grizzlebrand, if you do all the work to get him into play, you just win?
Well, the key card that's actually preventing some of that, we talked about this earlier, is Zealous Conscripts.
Oh man!
You know, we saw Jesse Hampton absolutely annihilate his opponent because of his opponent's Gazellas and Gristlebrand.
That was outstanding, by the way.
Unreal to
Both
watch.
of them in one turn.
Really awesome. But yeah, you don't want to get that guy stolen. Right.
Yeah.
Because chances are the deck that's been in the driver's seat, the aggressive deck, is better able to take advantage of those cards immediately than the person that's had to spend all this time getting a Gristlebrand out.
Now,
so I would say probably 4 out of 5 times.
Okay, so 4 out of 5.
Right.
Now, in this particular matchup, Godanis doesn't have access to Zealous Conscripts.
That's true.
You mentioned one of my favorite limited cards that's now a constructed card.
Oh, yeah?
Silent Departure.
Yeah.
So this Silent Departure, he's got 3 of them in the main deck.
He also has 3 copies of Dungeon Geists that are obviously can take Gristlebrand out of the way as a blocker to clear the way for a Spectral Flighted creature.
Because that's one of the things about Grizzlebrand, right, is that you can play him and you could draw a bunch of cards, which is really one of the more powerful things you can do.
Yes.
In a pretty obvious way.
Of course.
But he also blocks really well.
Blocks everything, gains you all your life back.
Right. Like, you play them and they can't attack you.
Yeah, exactly.
They can't race you.
Right.
You know, so I think that, this Silent Departure is probably going to do a lot of work.
I agree.
And looking at Ken Yukihiro's mana base, he has 4 Woodland Cemetery and 1 Swamp plus a Cavernous Soul, so hard casting Grizzlebrand doesn't seem like a likely thing. He's going to have to faithlessly get it back away or get it back into the thing. Sheldon, what do you think about this matchup? This is a tough one to evaluate. Zach said he didn't know. He said, there's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, I think it's really kind of the 51-49. If I was going to put it in the 51-49 side, I might say Reanimator because it's bigger.
Makes sense.
What it does, it just feels more powerful. The Spirits deck gets there relatively quickly, like you said. Sam Black called it the mid-range combo deck.
Right.
So you can see it doing a lot of damage, especially when the increasing savagery resolves. Then suddenly the math has radically changed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think To a very slight degree, I think I like the Reanimator a little better, just because of its size.
I'll tell you too, another thing I think that's really important is just how good of a start the Spirits deck gets off to. I mean,
we've seen some pretty... One of them was just, here's some lands, I'll be here for a while, don't worry about me. And then some of them was like, here, take 5.
Right.
And by the way, you can't kill this, and if you can't kill me before this does, winner.
Well,
right. I mean,
take 5, take 14.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And
we did see some of that going on,
I mean,
too.
if the Spirit deck goes Avacyn's Pilgrim Geist of Saint draft, it's going to be really hard for this deck to catch up to that. I mean, it only has so many tools.
Right.
Right, but if, some of the draws involve like Avacyn's Pilgrim, okay, cast Increasing Savagery on my Avacyn's Pilgrim, and Wolfer's Silverheart, but a little bit slower, a little bit clumsier, less evasion, less to do. So, I mean, I think it really depends on how well the Spirit deck is able to deploy its early drops. It really needs an
I think
Invisible
that's
Star.
the real key in the real key in the match is goes early turns.
Yeah.
If he's not doing much on his early turns, I think he's in a lot of trouble. If he is doing stuff on his early turn, then it becomes a race.
Do you like aggressively mulliganing if you're Godanius here?
I think so. I mean, I know, I'm sure this has been discussed at length by this point. I think I would have mulliganed John Finkel's opening hand in his last match. I mean,
didn't do a whole lot. Maybe was he missing one color of mana?
He was missing a color of mana, and if he drew the white source or the blue source, and he had Evolving Wilds, his hand was very, very, very good. To me, though, you're playing kind of a combo deck. You need to assemble a couple of pieces, and you're just not going to win against the Miracle deck if you don't put them on a clock. I mean, the Miracle deck, it's got all the trappings of a deck that's good in the late game. It's got a ton of lands, it's got a fair amount of card drawing, it's got big threats like Yukio and Entreat the Angels. It has Wrath of Gods that can deal with the Spirit deck's hard to remove hexproof creatures. I feel like you just need to ensure that you're producing a threat on the second or third turn of the game.
Yeah, it has a certain kind of inevitability to it.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you were mentioning it, you and I were watching, and Sheldon, we were watching the coverage because that's what we'd be doing if we weren't sitting in this.
Well, it's kind of funny, we're sitting in here kind of commenting on the match. The lights are off, there's no cameras on. It's
Zac looked at me, he said, we should record this. It's like, but this is what we do when we're not on the camera anyway, so it makes some sense. But one of the things, so Ken Yukihiro, he has not played against Gaudenus in this tournament yet. So we don't know that portion of the data. Some of these guys have bumped into each other a number of times throughout the course of the tournament, but that actually isn't the case here. Skill advantage? I don't see one.
These are two world-class players.
Yeah, that's true.
We've got bright lights shining on these players.
Right.
We have a lot of pressure. Godanius, I've played with him before. He's a very relaxed guy. You wouldn't call him uppity or he's chill and he's calm. And you see his reaction at the end of his match. He's like, we got there, because there was a big pause before the draw step. It was really dramatic.
Well, yeah, because he gets blown out if
he's dead.
His opponent draws the right card.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about like a really high tense situation, and you could see it. Even a guy like Go, who's a very relaxed guy, he felt it in that situation too. Now, Ken, he comes with pretty high praise, as we've mentioned.
Seems like it.
I don't think that either of these guys is going to let it get to him to a point that it affects their play on the board.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect either of these guys to wilt under the lights.
Let's go back to, speaking of the same topic here, to Josh Cho and Alexander Hay. Now, these guys are first-timers in their top 8s.
Yep.
Alexander seals up Rookie of the Year, so this is his first time out playing professional Magic. And Josh Cho, let's see, how many times is Josh? He's got 1 lifetime Pro Tour point coming in this event. That's how many I have.
Right.
And this guy is now in his top 8.
And only 1 more than I have.
So, Star City Games Blue, Jerry T, Brad Nelson are the guys that kind of headed off that team. Now, these guys are experienced players. They've been on the circuit for a long time. They're going to give him good advice, right? They're going to calm him down, and they're going to get him in a mental state where he can compete.
Well,
But we saw him yesterday.
He had a couple of shaky moments yesterday.
He did. He missed a couple of triggers. He got a couple of warnings. Nothing that affected the ultimate game, but we saw him, kind of slapping his face and
probably one of the best things. Probably one of the best things that happened to him all weekend was that, because now he's He's not sliding into a sort of a default attitude. He's remembering that.
That's a great point.
Because it just happened, and it could have been disastrous for him.
Yes.
I mean, so now he's got the radar is going.
And you talked about being on Star City Blue. I think, there's so many advantages to being on a good team, from playing with players better than you and improving consequently, to designing a good deck. But a lot of it just is, I played in my first Pro Tour when I was 15, and playing against somebody whose articles I'd read, whose name I'd heard, who I watched play, it's just really intimidating, especially when you're younger and not used to it. But when you're on a team full of world-class players, you've gotten that out of your system.
Yeah.
You've listened to somebody snore because you've had to share a room. It humanizes everybody, or whatever. You aren't as intimidated by the idea of the caliber of player you're up against, because you've just been interacting with them for so long.
What's Alexander Hayne going to do to intimidate Josh Cho that Jerry Thompson hasn't already done?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, and speaking of Alex, he plays high-level chess.
Really? I did not know that.
That's
got to be a huge advantage.
Those are, and chess being one of these games where all the pressure's on the player.
Oh, of course.
Right? I mean, it's just you either come and bring your game. There's no top decking. With Magic, one of the beauties of the game is you have to navigate these changing waters.
Right.
But with chess, you know what you see. Now things change, and of course you have to adjust your plan. But all the information is known to both players. That's got to be a lot of pressure on the player sitting at the table. So he's probably going to be a pretty cool cat when it comes to this stuff. That being said, Alexander, this has been a big year for him.
Oh, yeah.
And this is kind of the culmination of this. He's Rookie of the Year. He got second at GP Montreal. He lost to Rich Holland.
Not a bad one to lose.
Not a bad. You can swallow that pill if you have to. But now all of a sudden he finds himself playing a deck that they designed on a boat on the way here. So they decided that it would be financially better for them
to take a cruise instead of flying.
Take a economical idea.
To take a cruise to an intercontinental cruise across the ocean to Spain as opposed to driving a plane. And on the cruise, miracles happened apparently, because this is the deck that they came up with on the way over, and it's working.
Yeah.
He has found himself in the semifinals of the top 8. You've top 8'd an event before. What kind of deck did you have when you went, and can you compare it to what's going on with and maybe what Alex is thinking as he goes in?
Well, there's definitely some parallels. It was a block constructed Pro Tour both times. Mine was Honolulu 09. This is, not that. But there's some differences. We had a draft top 8. And I know my weaknesses were in limited, and that was definitely on my mind.
We should talk.
Yeah, right. Maybe there's a podcast I could listen to improve this. But with this, I think in a constructed top 8, you get to have a lot more confidence about your playtesting process, about your deck, and about your matchups. I think it's also a little bit easier to prepare with your team the night before and earlier on in the day, because you know the decks you can play against, you can grind those games, you can develop strategies that work. There's just a lot less variance in terms of what you do to think about it. That said, I'd done plenty of events before. I'd played in plenty of Pro Tours. I think I'd played in 20 or so Pro Tours before I top 8'd. But still, when you're under the lights, when you have that pressure on you for the first time, when you've been imagining that moment for as long as you can remember, I mean, these are things that you will remember for the rest of your life.
Do you think he knows that right now? You know what I mean? Like sometimes you find yourself in these moments in your life that you look back on.
Yeah.
And you're like, that was a big moment for me. And sometimes when you were there, you didn't quite.
Right. Yeah. We were talking that kind of thing on the break. I mean, I think if I'm 24-year-old Alexander Hayne right now, the only thing that's on my mind is I just beat John Finkel.
Yeah. Yeah. Seriously.
What do you think your upcoming matchups is like? I just beat John Finkel, right?
Yeah.
Not worried. But if he has discipline, he's going to be able to focus on the very next match, the very next interactions that are going to come up that he can account for and think about. I mean, a hallmark of a player with good mental discipline, someone that's going to succeed upon the Pro Tour, is to not always be thinking about, okay, what do I need to top 8? not always be thinking about, okay, well, you know, what am I going to face 2 rounds from now? I mean, he really has to sit down in the match he's playing and try and win that match.
I think we've seen a lot of examples of elite performers in games and professions.
Yeah.
And they know one of the things that separates them. You know, there's a million guys that can shoot jump shots as good as anybody in the NBA.
Oh, of course.
It's bringing the elite game all the time when it counts.
Yeah.
With a world-class defender hanging off of you.
Yep. Okay. So we get to see action now.
All right.
It is time for the semifinals. We are going to be throwing it back to the booth. Rich and BDM, let's see some action.